Hello, and welcome to today's online Q&A session for the Waste Management Strategy Review. Before we start, the City of Port Phillip respectfully acknowledges traditional owners of this land. We pay our respect to their elders, both past and present. We acknowledge and uphold their continuing relationship to this land. I'm Carol Tu, the Coordinator of Strategic Engagement here at Council. I'll be your MC for this session, which will finish at 1:30 or perhaps a little bit earlier, depending on how many questions we get through. I'll keep my introduction short so we can make the most of this time to go through any questions that you might have for us. Now, with me, I have Lachlan Johnson, the Executive Manager of Construction, Contracts and Operations, Marlene Mathias, our Program Director for Waste Futures, and Stacey Ward, our Senior Strategy Officer for Waste Futures. Marlene and Stacey will give a brief presentation shortly before joining Lachlan in answering any of your questions. So please type your questions into the chat as we go and we'll answer them after the presentation. We also have a few staff helping out in the back end to deliver the online session, so you may see a few extra people pop up on your screen. If there are any questions we're unable to answer straight away, we'll post them on the Have You Say consultation page with our answers over the next few business days. We'll also post a link to this recording, the recording of this session, on the Have You Say page for those who couldn't make it or who want to watch it again. And no members of the public will be visible in this recording. So I might hand over now to Marlene and Stacey to give you a bit of a background into why we're reviewing the strategy and to share some key considerations with you. So remember to post your questions in the chat as you go, and over to you, Marlene. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Carol. Good afternoon, everybody. I'll just bring up my presentation. Just takes a few minutes for things to come up, so hopefully everybody can see that.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us today. So I will kick off by talking a little bit about why are we reviewing our waste management strategy. So there's a few key considerations and there's a few reasons for why now. There's been a lot of change in the waste space over the recent years. So particularly kicking off with impacts to recycling that started in about 2017, 2018. So the China National Sword Policy saw thresholds being placed on the quality of recyclables, and at the time most of our recycling was exported out of Australia. So that saw the introduction of some issues, and then ultimately our recycling is no longer exported, which created some short-term issues, and now we're managing and creating those opportunities in Australia. In line with that, there's been some significant waste policy reforms, both nationally and in Victoria. So particularly in the Victorian context, there's been the release of Recycling Victoria. So that's our waste management and circular economy strategy. And that's come along with new legislation, so which is called the Circular Economy Waste Reduction and Recycling Act. It was introduced late last year. That will bring into force what's going to be known as Recycling Victoria, so a new agency that's going to be overseeing waste in Victoria. That's also brought about the requirement for councils to bring on board new waste services. So councils need to introduce food and green organics recycling, as well as separate glass recycling at dates in the not too distant future. Also, to sort of support all these changes, there's been significant landfill levy increases. And so what the landfill levy is essentially a levy of when that residual waste, so your garbage goes into the landfill or the tip, that's collected, and then that is able to be reinvested back into infrastructure, but that levy is going up, particularly with the view to reducing what goes into that garbage stream. And of course, the impacts from COVID, from the pandemic, which saw lots more people working at home, that saw more waste being put in the curbside stream, and particularly created some issues in our recycling stream. So we saw greater contamination rates just because there was more waste. So all of that together has meant this is the right time for us to review what we're doing in that waste space, and therefore reviewing our waste strategy. I'm going to hand over to Stacey now to talk a little bit about what we're planning to introduce.
Thanks very much, Marlene. So as Marlene touched on, what we're required to do as part of the changes through Recycling Victoria is actually to roll out 2 new recycling services, which is very, very exciting for us. So that does mean that all residents will actually have access to a food organics and garden organics, or a Fogo bin, and also a glass bin as well. Now, the way that we're going to be rolling this out takes into account that we have a very diverse housing community within Port Phillip, and that does mean that there's really no one size fits all when it comes to waste. So what we're going to be looking at doing is what we call a hybrid approach, where we have some properties that have access to a curbside bin, particularly for Fogo, but then also looking at some communal services and communal hubs as well, just to take into consideration the households that don't have space for an additional bin. So with this approach, what we're looking at doing is, in terms of timeframes, is we'll be looking to roll out a curbside Fogo service, so offering eligible properties and properties that have space for an additional bin for their household, and we're looking to roll that out in early 2023. In addition to that, we'll also be looking to roll out and expand on our current communal glass recycling hubs, and that'll also be happening in early 2023 as well. And in addition to that, we'll also be expanding on our communal food organics and garden organics recycling hubs that we have, but that will be taking place a little bit later. So we're looking at about mid-2023 for those. And just while we're talking about these, what we really want to highlight is that this hybrid approach has been based on a number of trials that we've done with the community with regards to both glass recycling and Fogo, which has shown that this hybrid approach is needed because some people are able to utilise an additional bin, but others really don't. And we're taking that feedback on board, and that is why we're looking at expanding our communal hubs as well. So if we want to just jump on to the next slide. So in terms of our communal hubs, the idea and the general consensus that we're going to be doing is we're looking at expanding our communal hubs for glass and also just Fogo to approximately 80 locations throughout the municipality, with the overall goal that every resident will have access to one of these hubs within about a 300 metre distance from their property, so people aren't having to walk too far to access them. Now, this graph just shows an approximate, not a definite, proposed locations for these hubs, basically just to show that they will be scattered throughout the municipality. The ones that we currently have now are concentrated in our parks and reserves and have been quite successful. But one thing that we do want to really reiterate through this process is, although we're going to be placing these hubs based on a variety of factors, including amenity and safety for our community, also accessibility for our collection vehicles, we also really want to make sure that these hubs are placed where our residents will be using them and where they would like them. So we really encourage everyone here today to jump on to our Have Your Say page as well. There's an interactive tool there where you can actually nominate and propose sites where a communal hub could be useful in your area. So we really encourage everyone to do that as well. Thanks, Marlene.
Excellent. Thanks, Stacey. So in addition to rolling out those new services, we just wanted to outline what the collection frequency will look like. So at the moment, we're not proposing any changes to the recycling bin collection. So your yellow bin, that will remain as is. In terms of anyone that will receive a curbside food organics, green organics, or Fogo service, that will initially commence as a fortnightly service. So that's from early 2023, And then we're looking to introduce a change about 6 months afterwards, so that your curbside Fogo or your green litter bin will be collected weekly, and your general garbage bin will be collected fortnightly. So we're switching over the frequency of your green bin with your red bin. So that's something to take in mind. And the reason why we're looking at that change is particularly we understand from other councils and from other trials that have been out there is that it's really helpful in terms of a really great way of getting your organics out of your rubbish bin, because we know that there's a significant proportion of organics that are in your general garbage. So, and your Fogo, once you put food waste in there, you want to pick that up more frequently. So that's why we're looking at that change in terms of frequency. So just wanted to end on a bit of a timeline, so it's a bit clearer in terms of what we're proposing to do. So at the moment, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're looking to update the waste strategy, looking to set up the plan for introducing those new waste services. We're looking to make sure we spend the time before those services are introduced in informing and educating the community about why. So some of those new services start in January 2023. Then there's some more information and education. We continue that through. We introduce some more services and change our collection frequency in July 2023. And then we work through assessing and refining and continuing to look at, do we need to change where the bins are? Do we need to change how often we're collecting our communal bins? What do we need to do? So we'll continually assess and refine. And we're ultimately working towards Recycling Victoria. So as I mentioned earlier, that Recycling Victoria policy is bringing in some significant targets for us to meet in terms of council meeting those targets. So we want to divert 72% of waste from landfill by 2025, and we want to cut the volume of organic material going to landfill. So that's trying to pull out a significant proportion of what's going into the garbage stream back into the Fogo bin by 2025. So we're looking to introduce all these changes so we can meet those targets. So thanks everybody, and we might throw it open to Q&A now.
Fantastic, thank you, Marlene. And I'll just reiterate, as Stacey mentioned, that we are gathering feedback on Have You Say on the proposed locations for communal bins, and how we might determine what is a good location, so around some of the criteria, but also some other really key information. So I encourage everyone to check out the page and provide their feedback through that. So we might jump into the first question if we can. So I might direct this one to you, Marlene, if I could. So Marlene, why is council not proposing to roll out a hybrid glass recycling model instead of just communal?
Yeah, look, that's a really great question, and I'll probably build on what Stacey started to present in terms of that solely communal approach for glass is based on our glass trials. So what we have seen through the glass trials is that the take-up of the communal service was really beyond our expectation. So we started with a smaller number of hubs, we increased the number of bins at those locations, we expanded the number of locations, and we understand even today that people are travelling quite significant distances to use the hubs we have. So we know that uptake's really great, as opposed to the curbside service, which, as Stacey mentioned, just not everybody can accommodate a bin. And the volume of glass going into the curbside bins didn't really warrant a wide rollout of that curbside service at this stage. So really we're basing it on what we've seen on the trials and what we've seen in terms of customer input and customer requests coming in over the last 6 months.
Great. And there are questions gathering feedback on that on the Have You Say consultation as well, isn't there, Marlene?
That's right, yes.
Fantastic. I've got a question here for Lachlan, if I could. So Lachlan, are all councils across Victoria required to introduce the 4-service model?
Carol, that's another good question. Yes, they are. So as Marlene pointed out before, state government policy that was actually legislated last year with the new Waste Act enshrines that all councils and alpine authorities in the state have to provide the 4 services for their communities. Now, some councils are more progressed in achieving that outcome than others. So there are some councils, and people often talk about Hobson's Bay and Surf Coast Shire and Macedon Ranges, where those councils have rolled out the 4 services. In the approach that they've taken, they've rolled out 4 bins to every household in their municipality. Obviously, what we're proposing for the City of Port Phillip is to achieve that 4-service model through a combination of bins at individual households, but also the communal model. And as Marlene and Stacey have outlined, that's based on a lot of evidence that we've been able to gather on our community's ability to be able to utilise a hybrid service through the trials. And it's really reflecting the fact that we're a extremely densely populated municipality. We're 21 square kilometres with 110,000 people living in that 21 square kilometres. So we're one of the densest municipalities in Victoria, and indeed actually across the country. So we're trying to tailor that 4-service model to the City of Port Phillip context. But yes, all councils are currently tackling this challenge, and there's particular considerations that each council needs to be able to make in coming up with a service that suits their community.
Great, thank you, Lachlan. And Stacey, so you don't feel left out, I'll throw this one to you. So Stacey, can you tell us why is City of Port Phillip only proposing to give residents 120 litre Fogo bins when the plan is for them to be emptied out fortnightly? And was this informed by the Elwood trials, and if so, how?
Yep, no worries. So absolutely. So for those that aren't aware, the trial that we conducted in Elwood that's currently an ongoing service for the community, we rolled out a 240 litre bin with a fortnightly collection. And what we found through the audits that we did each fortnight, but also from quite a lot of extensive consultation and discussions that we had with participating households, was that the 240 litre bin was too big. So essentially what the feedback was, there were a very few number of households that did like the larger bin, and they tended to be households that were quite large and had quite extensive gardens. So they were using it for a lot of garden organic materials like grass. But the general consensus was that it was too big. And also your organic materials, they do get quite heavy depending on how full your bin is, particularly if you are using it for food waste. So the 120 litre bin provides a more accessible option for households. And also does provide a more concise bin for properties that do really want to utilise that service, but unfortunately don't have as much space to accommodate an extra bin. And also with that, in terms of the collection frequency, so we did say that our proposal is to roll out a fortnightly collection for Fogo for the first 6 months, but then ultimately that will be changing to a weekly collection for Fogo. So those properties that are larger and that do generate more material and are filling their bin quite high, that will be emptied weekly is our proposal. So it kind of mitigates the capacity issue that households might be experiencing. But just to summarise, it definitely was informed from the feedback that we've received from Elwood.
Great, thanks for that, Stacey. Now, I might throw this next question to both Stacey and Marlene, and Lachlan, if you've got anything to add to it afterwards, please feel free. So the question is, what will council do to keep contamination rates low? How will this differ from properties with curbside Fogo, communal Fogo, which is food organics, curbside recycling, and so on? Maybe Stacey, would you like to kick off, and then we might pass on to Marlene?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're proposing to do in terms of monitoring the contamination is building upon the approach that we've used for the previous trials that we've conducted and those ongoing services. So essentially what that will be is structured and quite frequent auditing that we'll be doing. So if I touch on the households first, so those that will have access to a curbside Fogo bin, what we will be doing is what we call a flip-top audit. So potentially fortnightly, depending on how many staff will be engaging for that process, what we will do is we'll go around and we'll just lift open the lid of the bin and do a visual check to see if there's any contamination on the top. If there is contamination, what we'll do is we'll provide direct feedback to that individual household. So the approach that we've been doing previously has been a bin tag, where we simply either circle an image that's on the tag or write a little comment just to indicate what items can and can't go in the bin. And then that when the resident takes their bin in, they've got that direct feedback for themselves. And then in terms of our communal hubs, obviously it's a little bit more challenging in terms of monitoring and educating the community for things that can and can't go in, because people will be using the bins from various locations. So we can't really provide that direct feedback to the people that are using it and that might be using it incorrectly. But the important thing to note is that we will be doing the same contamination management inspections that we will be doing for the curbside bins. So prior to each collection, particularly in the first 6 months of implementation, is when we'll really be focusing our efforts on the contamination management through the flip-top audits. So we'll do that for both glass and the communal food organics bins, and that is what we are doing now as well, as the service is still being rolled out. And then what we'll do based on that information from what we're seeing is we'll either update the signage and educational materials that are placed out at the hubs. I don't know if anyone can recall the image that Marlene showed during the start of the presentation, but there is signage along the bins and also like some standalone signage as well. What we have been doing previously is also including some signage on the tops of the bins, so when people are about to put their materials in, it just kind of captures their attention. And also, as this does get rolled out more broadly throughout council, it's a really fantastic opportunity for us to increase our overall education engagement through online platforms. So it gives us an opportunity to really ramp up some educational messages on things like our Facebook page and also our newsletters that go out to the community as well. So there are a few sample approaches that we might be taking. Marlene, I don't know if there's anything that I've missed that you want to touch on?
No, I think that was pretty comprehensive, Stacey. So I think that was great. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a great answer. Okay, Marlene, while I've got you, I might ask you the next question. So how will we make sure that communal bins in parks don't become dumping grounds for other rubbish?
Yeah, look, that's a significant consideration in how we're planning to roll out those communal services. So there's a couple of elements sitting around that in terms of, firstly, there's looking at the right locations for those communal bins. So you want them in an accessible space, but also a space that's not hidden. So you want it to be out in the open, so it's safe for people to be there, but people can observe other people using those locations. Also, we need fit for purpose bins for those locations. So you want them to be the right sizing, and we need to make sure that those bins are being collected more as frequent as they need to be collected, because you don't want people accessing those locations and them being full. There's also other design considerations we're looking at in terms of how do we build some structures around those bins so it fits really nicely into the space, so it doesn't look like a bin out in the open, so that when people access those sites, it looks like something that you want to be part of that park. And the more attractive that setting, the less likely people are to just dump rubbish next to it. So there are a couple of things we're doing to really make sure it's not an illegal dumping hotspot that we create by putting bins there. I don't know, Stacey or Lachlan, if you wanted to add anything. Great.
Great answer. Thank you, Marlene. Can you talk a little bit, while I've got you, Marlene, about glass as a contaminant, and why it can't go into our mixed recycling bins?
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, it's like you can still put it in your recycling bin, but the reason why we've set up those glass recycling hubs and why it's better to take it out of your recycling bin is glass is really difficult to pull out as a stream out of that mixed recycling stream. When glass breaks in your bin, it's really hard to separate it when it gets to the recycling depot. So you can quite easily get out metal and paper, but glass gets quite stuck in it. So you're not seeing those recovery rates. And glass, so if you have it as a separate stream, it's much easier to be recovered, and then it can be recovered back into drink containers, or at the moment, a lot of glass is reused for road base and other building materials. So that's why we're asking, and that's why we set up those locations, because we know you get a much better outcome by having glass on its own. Equally, at some point, we do know, we're not sure exactly what date, but we know glass will no longer be able to be put in your recycling bin at some point. So at some point, it will be considered a contaminant and it will no longer be able to be put in your yellow bin. So this is about giving people options, recovering glass in a better way, and then setting ourselves up for that point in time when it's no longer able to be put in your yellow bin.
Great, thank you. Lachlan, I might throw the next question to you if I could. So do you anticipate that contamination in apartment blocks will be higher than in houses or for houses? And if so, are you planning to collect that material with the same truck or separately?
Carol, that's one of the big challenges that we're trying to grapple with. Yes, we absolutely do anticipate that contamination rates will be different for different segments of our community. So we have that now. So we did some municipal-wide audits in about September last year, where we looked at the composition of waste and recycling bins across the entire city. And we found that contamination rates in recycling in our existing yellow lidded bin curbside recycling stream for apartment buildings was significantly higher than it was for residential standalone properties. We anticipate that will be the same when we get into food organics and glass as well. So we think that contamination rates in the communal service, which is likely to be used by people in apartments or people in smaller houses that don't necessarily have the need or space for a dedicated Fogo bin, we anticipate that those contamination rates will likely be higher as well. And then we anticipate that with the change to the foreshadowed change from weekly garbage collection to fortnightly garbage collection, that we will see an increase in contamination in recycling streams as well. So it's a really big challenge. We've fortunately, Stacey was speaking about the trial results. We've fortunately had really low contamination rates in our organic services that we've provided, so the trial and now the ongoing service in Elwood, and in the communal trials that are still ongoing throughout the city. We've had really low contamination rates, but we do accept and acknowledge that the people that are utilising those services at the moment are really the people that are incredibly motivated to do so. When you roll this out as a service or two services across the entire city, a lot of people it'll just become part of the waste service. So there is the potential there that some of the human behaviour will potentially drive up contamination rates. Can we collect apartment building recycling separately to single unit dwellings? No, unfortunately. The problem is really a practical and logistical one, in that in many of our streets, you've got a single unit dwelling next to an apartment building, next to another single unit dwelling. So in essence, if you look to try and have one truck driving around the city each week to collect recycling from single unit dwellings, and one driving around the city to collect for multi-unit developments or apartment buildings, you're in essence going to double your costs. You still need the trucks to drive a very similar distance, and any potential offsets that we might get from separating out the contamination, higher contamination that we might get from some of those streams is really going to be offset through that additional cost. So we would love to be able to separate that. It would provide some great opportunities for us, but unfortunately, due to the way that the city exists, in that everyone being commingled in terms of housing dwelling types, it's just impractical for us to do so, even if we would potentially like to do so in the future.
Sure, thank you for that answer, Lachlan. Marlene, I might throw to you next. So Marlene, how are you going to make communal bins accessible for people of all ages, including those with disabilities, all genders, all ages, and so on?
Yeah, so a couple of things in terms of that question. So the first part is we absolutely are including that as part of the criteria of where we're going to locate the communal hubs. So we're looking to locate them in spaces where you can access them. There's good lighting. It's easy for someone to go in, whether you're walking or whatever method of transport or however you need to get there. We're also really seeking feedback. So on the Have Your Say survey, we're really interested to understand what support people might need to access those locations, how they might access those locations. Do we need to put them close to public transport, or is there other considerations that we might not have thought of in our design of where we're planning to locate them? So as Stacey mentioned earlier, we're trying to make sure everybody will be within walking or travel, like easy travel distance to those hubs. But please, we're really seeking that feedback if there's things we need to consider in how people might access them.
Fantastic, thank you, Marlene. Stacey, I've got a question for you this time. Can you tell us, will you be providing caddies and liners and other types of things that for all residents to use for food scraps, even if you don't get a Fogo bin?
Yeah, good question. So the approach that we did for the Elwood Fogo trial was every property that got a Fogo bin also got a little kitchen caddy, which is essentially a really small bin that you can just pop on your bench or in a cupboard to put your food waste in. And what we found with that is some people really loved having a caddy and some people really hated it and thought that it wasn't helpful to them, or they want to use their own. So what we're going to be doing for the Fogo service, both the curbside but also people that will be accessing a communal hub, is people will be able to collect a caddy and some certified compostable caddy liners, but we won't be delivering them directly to people's properties. What we will be doing is looking to have a supply of them at council buildings, so our town halls, potentially working with our libraries, where members of the community can go and pick up a caddy and some certified compostable liners if they do want them. But essentially, we do encourage people to use, rather than getting a brand new caddy, if there are things in their home that they could use. So for example, what I use at my house is an old honey jar. We've had some people that have used ice cream containers. So basically anything with a lid is perfect to collect food waste. But yeah, everyone will have access to a caddy and to some liners if they would like it.
Fantastic, thank you. Marlene, I'll throw this one to you, and if Stacey, you want to add to it, feel free. So food organics will smell and potentially be an amenity issue in parks for the communal hubs. How will council manage this?
Yes, and there's a couple of things in relation to that. So we have got now 6 communal food organics hubs up and running already. So we do have a bit of experience in managing those sites. So the first thing is there's a smaller bin size that's been put out in those locations. So rather than the bigger bins with building up a big volume of organic waste, we've downsized to smaller bins, so that you don't have such a big build-up that may create some odours. Equally, it's about looking at the best frequency of pickup, because if you can pick it up at the right frequency, then you don't have those odours and smells building up. We're also looking at the best locations and not, we want people to access them, but not right next to someone's house. So there's quite a few things we're looking at in that space. So we're really looking to manage that so that we don't create amenity issues for anyone living nearby to those locations. Stacey, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I might just quickly say, Marlene did mention that we will be looking at the collection frequency, but really wanted to reinforce that we have the flexibility to kind of adjust that depending on the time of year. So we do understand that spring and summer, obviously it will be a lot warmer. So what we will be doing is keeping an eye on those things and adjusting the collection frequency with our contractor to make sure that on those really, really hot days or hot weeks or hot months, that those bins aren't sitting out there for a couple of days, if it will be creating any issues.
Fantastic, thank you. I might throw this next question to Marlene if I could. Marlene, residents can currently drop off garden material at the transfer station in South Melbourne. Are we planning on changing this, given we'll be giving many residents bins for their garden organics?
No, so we're not, at this stage, we're not proposing any changes to that ability to drop off green waste, because, and equally the hard waste and green waste pickups. So we're not proposing any changes in that space, particularly because we know it can be challenging if you've got big branches and other things. Sometimes it's really difficult to break it down and put it into those smaller bins. So at this stage, those services will still be available.
Great to hear that. Thank you. Lachlan, one for you. Can you tell us a bit about why and how the waste costs are changing?
That is a very big question, Carol. As Marlene pointed out before, the broader context in which waste services are provided, it's changed a lot. So, you know, from really big internationally consequential decisions such as China's changes around importing of material, through to things like state government policy requiring all councils to roll out 4 services. There's a lot of different drivers here, but really it can be summarised in that for a long time we, you know, in Australia and in Melbourne and in the city of Port Phillip, we were in essence, we had access to a very cost-effective, albeit probably an environmentally dubious way of managing our recycling. So that is no longer with us. We as a society and through the our elected representatives, there's policy that's been put in place to actually really change how we as a society manage our waste. So it's now the law in the state of Victoria that will roll out these additional services and will actually try and embed what's known as a circular economy. So in other words, trying to recycle material, give it a second life rather than burying it in the ground. With that comes significant cost to make that transition. So you know, we're running out of landfill space, so therefore landfill providers are charging additional prices. The state government has cost drivers that they've put in place in terms of effectively a tax that councils and users of landfill facilities pay. The state government does that to try and incentivise recycling as opposed to landfill disposal. And then we've got a changing market when it comes to processing as well. So with the collapse of the SKM recycling company, who the City of Port Phillip and many other councils used a few years ago, there's a lot of change in terms of that market, suppliers in the market. There's also a lot of new technology coming on board as well. So some people may have heard of advanced waste processing and other things as well, which is ways to be able to extract more and more value embed those circular economy principles into waste streams. So with all of that change and all of that flux, there's a lot of price instability at the moment. So prices are going up significantly. The silver lining, I suppose, is that if we're able to implement a circular economy, it should actually become more cost effective. So reusing materials can hopefully avoid us needing to go and take new materials and generate new products. Avoiding material going into landfill can hopefully provide us a source of additional resources that we as a society can use. So whilst there's most certainly waste cost increases happening now and are likely to be sustained over the medium term, the utopian future, I suppose, that we're all trying to work towards is really a point where waste becomes less of a burden and is seen as being more of a resource. And if we're able to make that change, the idea is that the cost to actually do so will stabilise. But unfortunately for the moment, the costs are increasing right across the sector. That's impacting residents and impacting council as well.
Thanks, Lachlan. And I might just keep you online to answer our last question, which is also a big one. So I understand council is considering the possibility of a separate waste charge. Do other councils have separate waste charges, and what do you generally get for that charge?
Thanks, Carol. You're giving me all the tough questions. Yes, so council is considering a waste levy. We're currently consulting on that at the moment and encourage people to go to the Have Your Say website and provide some feedback on that process. Other councils, there's 79 councils in Victoria. I think there's about 5 that don't have a waste levy that sits separate from the rates that are levied on residential and commercial property owners in municipalities. City of Port Phillip is one of those councils that doesn't have in place a rates levy or a rates charge. The waste levies or waste charges are all not created equal. So some councils include things like street cleaning, beach cleaning, litter collection and administrative costs to actually provide those waste and amenity services. What council is currently consulting on in the proposal is a much more streamlined waste levy in the City of Port Phillip context. So it's proposed that it would cover the curbside services, so the services we've been speaking about today, so curbside bins, the communal Fogo bins, the Fogo bins, the communal glass bins, and the operation of the transfer station in South Melbourne. But it's not proposed that that waste levy would encompass things like the street cleaning, beach cleaning, maintenance of public open space, litter picking, those kind of things. They're proposed to remain funded as they currently are through the general rate.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Lachlan. And can I thank Marlene and Stacey as well for their answers to the questions that we've asked today. So we've actually come to the end of our questions for today's session. So I hope that you found this session useful, and we really do look forward to your contribution to the Waste Management Strategy Review via Have Your Say by 5th of March, which is next Saturday, I believe. All the contributions that we received through the consultation will be considered as we review and update the waste management strategy, and that's prior to presenting a draft revised strategy for council's endorsement to release for further consultation. So we will be coming back out to the community in late April to get feedback on that the revised draft strategy. So I'd like to thank everyone for today, and particularly Marlene, Stacey and Lachlan for being our panel members and answering the questions. I really appreciate that. And I'd like to also thank the staff who helped deliver the session online today. So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.